Annette, is Annette in? Annette, are our youth in or out today? Okay, so we're in. Okay, so our young people are in with us today. Let me just pray, and if I'm anything like you, I've had a hard time being present to the songs and to this place. I feel a little unnerved by what's happened. But we're in this together, and as I open the Scriptures, I'm trusting that God's going to use His Word to speak to us in a way that will be redemptive and helpful and hopeful for all of us. So let me just pray before we begin. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you. I pray that as I share from your word, that only what is of you would come forth, and what is not would just fall to the ground. That you would help us as we open to your word for it to find a fertile space to grow. Would you speak to us in the place that we most need to be spoken to? And may it help us to move towards the life and the person that it is that you want us to most be. We pray and ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So if you've not been with us, we have been over the last few weeks in a series called Faithful. And we've been looking at and examining the life of a young man, Samuel, who lived about 1,100 years before the time of Christ. And last week when we were looking at his life, we were talking about how from a very young age that his life and his integrity and his character caused him to stand out. When everybody else around him were doing things that really were in no way representative of the God that they said they worshiped, he was steadfast. And you will remember if you were here that he held nothing back. That as a young man he had courage and he had a strong sense of who he was, and that when he spoke, people could trust what he said. And from the north to the south, people listened to him, and he was 10 years old. He served in the role of prophet and priest. Well, in between last week and this week, he's going to disappear for about 3 chapters in 1 Samuel. From chapters 4, 5, and 6, things are going to get very, very dark. He's behind the scenes. We don't know what's going on in his life. When he emerges again in chapter 7, he's going to be 30 years old. So some 20 years pass in those 3 chapters. Now, just a little background, because it will be important for you to understand this context before I read and share what I'm going to. The people have been at war with their neighbors, the Philistines. And you can see these are the 5 major cities of the Philistines. So this strip right here are people who were fierce warriors, and they've been in battle with them. And the people of Israel, God's chosen people, people of a covenant, are wondering in these 20 years why it is that they keep at every turn getting slaughtered. Every battle they go into, they are defeated. And they say to themselves, we're covenant people. How are these godless people continuing to defeat us time after time after time? They can't see it. But that's how life is. A lot of times when we end up in a certain space that we are, everybody else outside of us can see how we got there, but we're blind to it. They're blind to the reality of the fact that the reason that they keep getting defeated time after time after time is because of their idolatry. They had made a commitment, they had made a covenant with God. And at every turn they had been unfaithful. And they started setting up shrines and going to the temples of the neighboring gods, of different gods. And we wonder, how is it possible that in such a short span of time they could forget how God had brought them through the things that He had brought them through and provided for them at every hand? How is it possible that they could forget and turn to other gods? But that's exactly what had happened. They were worshiping Baal, and they were worshiping Ashtoreth, and they were worshiping some of the other gods of the land. Well, as time passes, you'll remember if you've been here, there was a man who was mentoring Samuel. He was the high priest at Shiloh. His name was Eli. Eli is about 90-some years old. He is really towards the end of his life. He's gone blind. He's losing his hearing, and he's just not himself. Well, one day he's sitting just outside the city gates, and a messenger comes and delivers the news that once again Israel has been routed in battle, and some 30,000 of them have been killed. But not only have 30,000 of them been killed, his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, have been killed. Now, if you've not been here, Hophni and Phinehas were terrible scoundrels. They were tasked with leading the sacrificial system at the temple, but they abused their privilege. They were not good people at all. So he gets word that they've been killed. And even worse than that, he gets word that the Ark of the Covenant, which represents the real presence of God, has been taken by their enemies. It's missing. And when he hears the news, the chair that he's sitting in, he falls backwards, breaks his neck, and dies. 30,000 people, Hophni and Phinehas, Eli, dead. Ark of the Covenant, gone. It gets worse. Phinehas' wife is getting ready to give birth to their first son. And as she hears the news about her father-in-law, and she hears the news about her husband, and she hears the news about the ark, she is deeply, deeply troubled. And in childbirth, just after she delivers her child, she too will die. It's an absolute mess. It's dark. But just before she gives birth, she names her son. Does anybody know what she names her son? She names her son, don't ever name your son this if you're going to be naming children. She names her son Ichabod, which means the glory of the Lord has departed. She's giving birth to her child, and it gives you a sense as she names him how she feels about her life and about the life of the nation of the people that she knows and loves. And so she dies, and Ichabod is born. The glory of the Lord has departed. But truthfully, the glory of the Lord had departed a long time ago. They just didn't see it. And that's how it is sometimes in our lives too. Sometimes the glory, the presence, the power of God in our lives dissipates until one day we wake up and we realize, hey, where are you? And what is going on in my world? That's where Israel is. We don't know where Samuel is at the time, but we do know that the Ark of the Covenant, which represents the real presence of God, is taken to one of the Philistine cities called Ashdod. Now, as they take the Ark of the Covenant into the city of Ashdod, they take it into the temple of one of their gods called Dagon. Just think merman. He's half man, half fish. He is the god of the sea. And as they take the Ark of the Covenant into the temple, the idea is that in battle, when your God defeated their God, you would take some representation of the God of your enemy and you would place it as an offering in front of your God. But in chapter 5, what we learn is that they did this, and then in the next morning when they went in, Dagon had fallen down as if worshiping Yahweh. He had fallen down at the face of the Ark of the Covenant. They propped him back up. They went back out. The next day they come back in. This time he's fallen again, but he's broken in two. And then they start to notice that there are these diseases that are ravaging the people in their cities. They're getting these tumors. And there are these rats that are starting to infest the land. It's a plague on their people and on their land. And they think to themselves, what in the world is going on? We didn't have this trouble until the Ark of the Covenant came to our town. We need to get rid of this. And so, what they do is they move the Ark of the Covenant from Ashdod to Gath. The people of Gath said, sure, bring the Ark of the Covenant to us. And the exact same thing happens to the people and to the land there. There's going to be a trend that's happening. So the people of Gath say, get this thing out of here. We do not want this. So they move it up to Ekron, but the people meet them at the gate and they say, you are not bringing that thing in here, no chance, no how. And so what they decide to do is that they take this ark and they tie it to 2 cows and they send the cows out on the road towards Israel. They're sending the ark back. They want nothing to do with it. And as they send the Ark of the Covenant back, that's where we're going to pick up our story. The story is picked up in chapter 7 as the people are mourning the losses of many, many people, and so too the presence of their God. In verse 2, it says, the ark remained in Kiriath Jearim, so the cows bring the ark back, and it stays there for a long time with the man and his son. And during the time that this was transpiring, all of Israel mourned because it seemed that the Lord had abandoned them. That's how it felt. So that is the backstory. It's a very, very dark time. And Samuel now emerges, and he's 30 years old. 20 years have passed, and this is where we pick up the story. Then Samuel said to all of the people of Israel, if you are really serious about wanting to return to the Lord, then I need you to get rid of all your foreign gods, your images of Ashtoreth, determined to obey only the Lord, and then he will rescue you from the Philistines. And so, the Israelites got rid of the images of Baal and Ashtoreth, and they worshipped only the Lord. They not only had to add God back, Yahweh back into their lives, they had to subtract the other pantheons of gods that they had been worshiping. And when I look at this passage, I think to myself, idolatry is so much easier to spot when you're worshiping the temple of another god. Right? If I am going down and I am bowing down to the idol of a God that is different from the one that I know to be the one true, sovereign, only God, it's easy to spot. So I can take the idols out of my home and smash them and get rid of them. But for you and I, it's very much more difficult to realize the idols that we have established and set up in our own lives and in our own hearts. I think back to what it must have been like for them, and I wonder, how could you worship Baal or Ashtoreth? And then I think, pretty easy, because you want exactly what we want. These were the gods and goddesses of fertility. They didn't want famine to plague their land. They wanted produce. They wanted to live and have production from their crops. They want what we want. They wanted provision. They wanted protection. They wanted security. They wanted peace. They want all the things that we want. But it's much easier when you look at a temple or an idol and you say, I have to turn from that because that is not my one true God. That's not the God that I grew up with. That's not the God that I'm in covenant with. That's not the God that I made a pledge to. And I think to myself, how is it that you and I, in the covenant that we have made with God in our lives, could so easily set up idols of our own and not know it? In this next month or so, as we move towards Christmas and the celebration of Christ, the advertisers and marketers will have a field day presenting us with all the things that we desperately need and can't live without. And we didn't even know it until they told us that. Some of the commercials for the Jeeps and the cars that are so slick and then can do so many things, and the clothes and the jewelry and all of these things, they're competing with our attention, with the priority that we place on our desire for them, because idolatry really is just supplanting God with something or someone else that you think you need to live, that you think you need to have success, that you think you need to feel good about yourself. And so there's just this endless pursuit. Used to be a show called American Idol, right? And we watched this show and we wanted to be these people who were plucked out of nowhere, who had a talent that could be recognized and then exalted, because we would want to be successful, we would want to be known, we would want to be popular, we would want people to clap and cheer for us, right? And I think at this point when we look at the story, it's just much easier to identify an idol in a temple than it is in our heart. They wanted everything that we want. They just somewhere along the way got lost in who they thought was going to give it to them. What is it that you need, you can't live without, that you are every day going after with such vigor and gusto that you've forgotten that the God who made you and designed you for purpose longs to be your number one? That's really the question as you move through the chapter that you'll want to look at. Because somewhere along the way, it is so easy to set up idols and worship them and not even realize you're doing it. Samuel calls them to a place of accountability, and it says that they not only added God back into their lives, they subtracted all their other false gods. Let me read the rest of the story and then we'll close. When the then, verse 5, then Samuel told them, "Gather all of Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you." And so they gathered at Mizpah. In a great ceremony, they drew water from a well, and they poured it out before the Lord. They also went with food all day, and they confessed that they had sinned against the Lord. And it was at Mizpah that Samuel became their judge. I don't know what the whole water on the ground deal is. Maybe it's symbolic of just they are totally in. They're pouring themselves out completely. But they spend the entire day not eating. They're fasting and they're praying and they're weeping because their eyes are opened and they realize what they'd been doing. This is a moment of clarity for them. It's a moment of confession. Confession is a practice that is good for all of us. Be it public or private, whatever the case, when we realize that the direction that we've been heading in our life is not taking us to the place that we want to go or need to go or should be going. So there is this come to Jesus moment where we see it and we say, I'm just so sorry. I'm so broken. I don't know how I got here, but I don't want to stay here. I confess my sin before you and I turn from it and I turn towards you, who I'm trusting will guide me, who will provide me with what I so long for, which is peace and security and provision for all the needs that I've been relying on something or someone else. You know, we think we need this certain person in our lives. We think that when we find this person, we've found Jesus, and then about 2 weeks into the relationship, we realize this isn't Jesus at all. But we needed this man, this woman to complete us, to fulfill us, to make us happy, to give us security. Relationships can be good, but they're not God. And then you marry this man or this woman, and not long thereafter you realize that maybe what you were wanting you couldn't really find in them. And so you decide, I think I know what will make it better. I think we need a baby. Those of you who are laughing have had children, and you know what I'm saying. And we want to order our lives around the birth of this precious child, and we think that they will provide for us all of the things that we're lacking from the guy who we thought was Jesus. And we have the baby, and it isn't long before we realize that the baby just won't shut up. Just cries all night long, is a poop factory beyond belief. And all the things that we thought, as we've not slept for the third straight night, has gone out the window, because what we thought was going to be for us the answer to all of our prayers is not really. Baby's great, but it's not God. And it only takes us a few days or a couple of weeks. And if we haven't figured it out by that time, certainly by the time they hit 12, because then you get into all sorts of wrestling matches, which are quite fun. All I'm saying is there are things in our lives that compete with our allegiance and our priority of placing God at the center of all we do. And in this moment, the people realize that they need to get rid of their competing gods, and they need to reorder their world around the one that they had established a covenant with, who had promised them many things if they would remain faithful to him. When the Philistine rulers heard that Israel had gathered at Mizpah, they mobilized their army and they advanced. The Israelites were badly frightened when they learned that the Philistines were approaching. "Don't stop pleading with the Lord our God to save us from the Philistines," they begged Samuel. So Samuel took a young lamb and offered it to the Lord as a whole burnt offering. He pleaded with the Lord to help Israel, and the Lord answered him. Just as Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offerings, the Philistines arrived to attack Israel. But the Lord spoke with a mighty voice of thunder from heaven that day, and the Philistines were thrown into such confusion that the Israelites defeated them. I cannot even imagine what that loud sound must have been that was so confusing to them. These mighty warriors who had defeated Israel at every turn, all of a sudden have come to do it once again, and they're just so confused they don't know what they're doing. The man of God, Samuel, pleads, and God intervenes. There's a part in that passage, though, that strikes me. It's like the people confess their sins, and you think, as soon as I confess my sin, life is going to get better immediately. But as soon as they confess their sin, the enemy sees them massing, thinks that they are planning for war. It's really just a revival service. They're fasting and they're praying and they're pouring out their hearts before God, but their neighbors don't know that. So they say, we better do something. They're massing for war. Let's go get them before they get us. And it strikes me that the story would read much more nicely if, as they prayed and fasted and confessed, that the Philistines would have seen this, and they too would have realized the error of their ways and would have done the same, and God would bring peace to the land. But that is not what happens. It gets worse. And so they decide to attack, and as they attack, they are thrown into confusion, and Israel on this day wins. It's the first time they've won in 20 years, right on the heels of their confession. And as they win, Samuel goes and he sets up this large stone, and he places it between the town of Mizpah and Jeshanah. He names it Ebenezer, which means the stone of help, for he says, up to this point, the Lord has helped us. This is the stone he sets up. I don't know how he gets that stone. I mean, he must be super strong. I really have no idea. He must have help. I don't know. Some cows, oxen, I don't know. But he sets up this stone, and he places it in the area that is commemorating the Lord's help. And this is how the story ends, and this is where we'll close. The story began with a lot of death and dismemberment and just deep loss. The story began with a woman naming her child Ichabod. The glory of the Lord has departed. The story ends with Samuel and a group of people realizing the errors of their way, confessing their sin and getting rid of the competing gods, and setting up a stone to commemorate this special event. Why do you think they set up this huge stone? How easy is it to forget? I mean, you're going to forget most of what I've said as almost as soon as you walk out the door. It's pretty easy to forget. The Israelites will go back to their false gods. This is not a one-time deal. But he's trying to help them understand that today is the day for a name change. Today is the day where I look at myself in the mirror and I realize that if the glory of the Lord has departed, it is time for me to get rid of my competing gods and to offer myself wholly to Him so that I could look to Him for help and hope and peace and prosperity, the place I most need to look, rather than thinking, if I get this man, this woman, this child, this car, this vacation, this whatever, they're all good, they're nice, but they're not God. And so we get to this space, and I think, what if today is the day for you and I for a name change? What if the way we've been traveling isn't really a way that leads to the one true God that would mark us as a people who are faithful and not have lost heart? Because that's really what happens is we stop being faithful when we lose heart, that there's possibility that the God we've given ourselves to is going to intervene in the way that we want God to intervene. We get disappointed, we go frustrated, we grow weary. Things aren't happening the way we want, they're not happening in the time we want, so we start to look elsewhere. And that's how it starts. But if we stay on that road too long, there's a lot of death and destruction that happens along the way. And so perhaps I'm just saying maybe it's time to turn around, to see things as they are, to examine our lives and to move away from a place where the glory has departed and into a place where we can commemorate this day and say, Sunday, November 5th, 2017 was the day that I turned back around and I started back in the direction that I was supposed to be going in. You can mark it with anything you want to mark it with. They marked it with a stone. But today is the day for a name change from no glory to God's helping me. And I wonder if today isn't the day for you to follow suit with those who've gone before us and to learn a few things from them as we look at and listen to our lives. So the worship team's going to come and they're going to play a song. They're going to lead us in one final song. You can sing along if you want, or you can just, you guys come on up, or you can just listen to the words. But I want you to think about what you've heard, and I want you to think about your life. And if you're moving in a direction that is leading you to life, then I say keep walking. One foot in front of the other, in front of another. Keep walking. Long obedience in the same direction. But if you've gotten off track and you've begun to think that what you need to provide security or happiness or success is going to come from some other place or some other thing, today's the day where you just get your mind right and get back on track. Today may be the day for a name change. I want you to listen and then I'll come back and we'll close.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you.
You know, two things will need to happen as we move from this space to the next if we're going to put ourselves in a position where we can learn from those who've gone before us. The first thing is there's going to need to be some clarity in your own mind and in your own life about what your competing Baals are. Some of us share some in common, some of us have different ones, but if we look at and listen to our lives, we're going to need clarity about the things that we think are going to provide for us things that they ultimately can't. And then once we've seen that, the second piece is that it's going to require of us some level of humility to realize that we just haven't been traveling the way that we should, and to be willing to let go of and to release those things that have not been serving us well. And then to turn to God and to ask God to not only forgive us, but certainly to forgive us, but to renew and to revive us and to lead us in a different way. Because the way that we've been going isn't the way to life and life more abundantly. And so I want to ask you all to stand, if you would. In the church that I grew up in, that song that you just heard would be a time of invitation. And people would come to the altar. They would literally come to the altar, and if they felt compelled, they would bow their knee and they would work out whatever it was in their heart they wanted to with God. And it's not that I don't believe in those things, but here's what I believe is going to be more important. What happens not only in this moment, but when you walk through those doors and you encounter all of the things that you were dealing with before you came in this morning, that's going to be where the sacrifice on the altar needs to occur. You're going to need to move from this place in a different way. I want you to mark this moment as an Ebenezer moment where you turn from that which wasn't serving you to that which would. And I want you to keep this memory strong, and whatever you need to do that, if it's staying here for a moment afterwards and just putting your knee, you can come up here, you can in your seat, you can leave and find some quiet space outside of here. But I today hope that you will learn from those who've gone before us and move towards becoming a more faithful person, a more committed person, a more devoted person in your life, ordering your life around the God who loves you and designed you for purpose and greatness. And that's my prayer for you. So as you leave, I bless you in Jesus' name. And I charge you with being a people of grace and peace. And I invite you to walk in a faithful way. It is the way that leads to life and life more abundant. God bless you guys. Be people of grace and peace.